When you think about preparing your car for the winter, it's also important to make sure that you've got a winter weather emergency kit. And that would be something that would have flashlights and batteries, blanket, gloves, hat, maybe some snacks, and a first aid kit. You might also want to throw a pair of boots or waterproof shoes in there so that if you have to get out and shovel or push your way out, you've got appropriate foot gear. The other thing that they talk about having is water, but what I would recommend is that you take that out to the car when you're getting ready to travel rather than storing it in the car because, of course, if we get into the cold weather that we typically have during the winter, you might end up with a frozen bottle of water, which isn't going to help you much if you're stalled because of a traffic delay or snowstorms or anything else.
With the leaves just beginning to fall from the trees, it may seem a little early to be talking about preparing for winter. However, there are several things we can do now to make sure that our house and vehicle are ready before the cold, snow, and ice arrive. On today's Sound Living, Winter Preparedness. Sound Living is a weekly public affairs program produced by Research and Extension at Kansas State University. I'm Jeff Wichman. Kansas State University Assistant State Climatologist Mary Knapp, who produces Weather Wonders, a weekly series on all things weather-related, says that what we see across Kansas during a typical winter in terms of average snowfall varies from east to west.
Well, it not only varies from east to west, but remember that average is a composite of 30 years worth of data, and so it can vary from year to year. And in Kansas particularly, we have quite a range of possibilities. In western Kansas, typically you would expect somewhere around 15 inches of snow. You get into the eastern part, you may be closer to 18 inches, but again, generally less than 20 inches of snow. The other thing that is very interesting about our winter precipitation is that it tends not to persist very long. As you go further north, when they get snow on the ground, they expect it to stay for quite some time. In Kansas, it's much more customary for that snow to be there for a couple of days, and then it melts away, and you've got the clear ground again. So it doesn't tend, on average, to be there very long. But again, there are the ranges of possibility. And we've had winters where in western Kansas, they've had over 100 inches of snow. In eastern Kansas, not quite so much, but still, it's not unheard of to have 20, 30, 40, 50 inches of snow for the season. So again, you can have quite a bit of snow, or you can have years where there's no snow at all, or there may only be a single snowstorm, and that can be not necessarily in the heart of winter.
And how are we defining winter?
Well, typically winter is defined as December, January, and February. For us, it also corresponds with our driest time of the year. The area that has the least change from summer to winter precipitation is the southeastern part of the state. It tends to be warmer on average, and they tend to get more even distribution of the precipitation throughout the year. So they don't drop off as dramatically in the winter as they do in western Kansas. In western Kansas, you can add up the 3 months of December, January, and February and not equal the precipitation for a typical March. So again, when you get that winter precipitation, it doesn't necessarily translate to a lot of liquid equivalent.
You mentioned temperatures. That is also something that will vary from region to region across the state. It's also something that normally doesn't tend to settle in for a long time.
Right. Again, what we expect in the continental climate that we have here in Kansas is that we can have quite a bit of variability in our winter temperatures. So we can have days in the winter where our highs are in the 60s and 70s, and then we can have days where our highs are in the teens. And that is, again, part and parcel with winter in Kansas.
Kind of depends on whether the systems are moving from the north or from the south.
Right. When we get that south wind, or what might surprise people is sometimes it's a west wind that brings the warmer air. The south wind, it's pretty expected you're going to be bringing up that Gulf air, and that tends to be warmer. What surprises people sometimes is that west wind can also bring warming temperatures, and what happens with that is it's coming downslope from the Rockies. As that air compresses, as it's going downslope, it tends to warm up. That's what quite frequently brings about what's known as a Chinook, or the snow eaters, where you can jump 20, 30, 40 degrees in just a couple of hours.
We mentioned December through February as being kind of winter, but there are some instances where we've had snow before those dates. What can we be doing now to get ready for that winter weather?
A couple of things that you could do to get ready for that is look at preparations around your house and around your car. Those are the two major areas to think about. Around your house, one of the first things that you're going to want to do is do the weatherizing, and that can be clearing up any damaged branches from the summer storms, anything that might be hanging over your power line or over your roof, so that if we get those strong winds or an ice storm, you have less chance that it's going to take down your power. Another thing is to look at disconnecting your hose and covering any outside faucets so they don't freeze and break and create that kind of damage. Third thing would be to think about covering your air conditioner or removing your window air conditioners. Again, you won't likely need that during those winter months, and you don't want that other portal for cold air to get into your house. And part and parcel with that would be covering windows and screens, closing any air gaps so you reduce that infiltration of cold air.
You mentioned the car. What can we do in terms of our automobiles?
Well, with your automobiles, first thing is, again, check and make sure it's in good maintenance shape. And that includes making sure you've got good tread on your tires, that you've topped off any of the fluids. You may need to switch out, for example, your windshield wiper fluid from that bug removal to something that is more tolerant of the cold temperatures, so you continue to have that efficacy in getting those windows clear. Also, check your antifreeze levels and make sure that you have enough for the cold conditions that are likely to occur. See that it's ready for those colder conditions. Another thing to look at would be look at your battery and see how it is holding up. People may be surprised to learn that their batteries can be weakened quite a bit with the high temperatures that you have during the summer, and you may not realize that until they fail to start your car on a cold winter day. So again, check the battery level, make sure it's charging properly and that it has a good charge on it.
And check those wipers, because you often use the windshield wipers, I think, more in the winter than you do sometimes in the summer.
You may be using them more, but it also may be moving heavier material. So you're moving that ice, you're moving that snow, and that can be harder to move and clear than simple raindrops. So again, making sure that your wipers are in good shape is another important check to make sure your car is ready for that winter operation.
Are there some things we should keep inside the car?
Right. When you think about preparing your car for the winter, it's also important to make sure that you've got a winter weather emergency kit. And that would be something that would have flashlights and batteries, blanket, gloves, hat, maybe some snacks, and a first aid kit. You might also want to throw a pair of boots or waterproof shoes in there so that if you have to get out and shovel or push your way out, you've got appropriate foot gear. The other thing that they talk about having is water, but what I would recommend is that you take that out to the car when you're getting ready to travel rather than storing it in the car, because of course if we get into the cold weather that we typically have during the winter, you might end up with a frozen bottle of water, which isn't going to help you much if you're stalled because of a traffic delay or snowstorms or anything else. So you want to have that ready. Another thing that you should check and make sure that you have in there are ice scrapers and a snow brush so that you can clear the car as needed. Make sure that you have jumper cables so that if you do need to get a jump start, you have the equipment to do that. Another thing to include would be road flares, and you also might want to make sure that you have tire chains.
It's also important to make sure that we're clearing off the vehicle before we start. I see a lot of people driving down the road with just a little tiny hole to look out of, and that's not safe.
No, you need to make sure that your entire windshield, front windshield, is clear. Make sure your rear view mirrors are clear. Make sure your side view is clear. And what people tend to forget or not really work on is clearing that snowpack off your hood and off of your car roof. The car roof is particularly important because that can become an ice chunk that gets blown off into traffic behind you and creates problems for those that are following you. On your hood, if you don't clear that off, you're going to have that coming into your face and blocking your vision right when you need it. So again, do a thorough job of removing all of that snow before you start traveling.
In addition to trying to just get to work or go from place to place in town, a lot of travel out of town during the winter months. What are some things that we should keep in mind when we're traveling outside of town?
When you're traveling out of town, one of the first things to do is check what the weather outlooks are along your route. So not just where you're at, but where you're going, and anticipate what kind of conditions you might encounter. Another important thing is to let someone know when you're planning on leaving, what route you're planning on taking, and when you plan to arrive, so that if you don't show up on time, there's somebody that knows where you're at and can get assistance to you. You may not be able to get a cell signal wherever you end up being stranded, so it's important to have that backup in place before you get on the road. Another important thing to do is make sure that you keep your gas tank topped off, and you don't want to let it go below a half a tank when you're on the road traveling. But also when you're in town, you don't want to let it get down to that last gallon that's there. It's easier for the tank to freeze or have frozen gas lines. So keep it up above a quarter of a tank at least, and maybe better a half a tank, just to have a little bit more security in your driving plans.
You may have mentioned, but we want to make sure that we're checking the entire route that we're traveling, especially if you're going from eastern Kansas to western Kansas, because things can pop up in a hurry.
Right, and it's not just eastern to western. It may be as simple as going from Manhattan towards the interstate, where down in the town you're still encountering warmer temperatures. The roads are not frozen. You still have good visibility, but you get into the uplands where the temperatures drop, and you go from a wet roadway to an icy roadway within a mile. So you want to check and see what road conditions are throughout the route. And keep in mind that it doesn't take much of an ice layer to create travel problems. That's also where you're going to want to be very cautious when you're driving in that winter weather. Allow a little bit of extra space between you and the car ahead of you. Slow down, drive appropriately for the conditions, and also be a little bit more alert to the pedestrians that might be in the area. You may take a little bit longer to stop, and they're not always paying as much attention, or they may not be as visible, particularly now that we're getting lighter later in the day and getting darker earlier in the afternoon. So again, pay extra attention to what obstacles might be around you.
And black ice, that is something that we need to be very aware of.
Right. Black ice refers to the fact that you can have a very thin layer of ice that's practically invisible, that looks like the pavement, or it may look like it's wet rather than ice. So that can be very dangerous, and you can get that with very little in the way of precipitation. Sometimes it can form just from fog or a mist layer. So again, it doesn't take much of that to become very, very slippery.
What kind of information does Kansas State have that can help farmers and just the public?
Well, there are a number of different things that you can look for. There are extension publications that talk about how to prepare and winterize your home. Family and Consumer Science has material about preparing a budget for those kinds of emergency conditions. And if you have a power outage, there's a lot of material about food safety.
And Mesonet will have all of the weather-related information.
Right. You can go to mesonet.ksu.edu and find out what the current conditions are. You can also get information about what the wind chill might be. Another tool that might be useful is that we have a heating and cooling degree page, and that will let you track heating degree days.
That's Kansas State University Assistant State Climatologist Mary Knapp, with information to help you prepare for the upcoming challenges that we'll likely face this winter. For more information on winter weather emergency kits, visit weather.gov. Sound Living is a weekly public affairs program produced by Research and Extension at Kansas State University. I'm Jeff Wichman, and this is the K-State Radio Network.